Um, so we've got Jim Vomero, and he's presenting empowering site owners by developing custom views plugins. Take it away, Jim.
Well, hello and welcome to the session. So we are going to talk about views, that core module for rendering content queries, and we're going to look at the benefits of extending them, so through these custom plugins. This presentation has 3 sections. So I'm going to start by talking about the evolving roles of site builders. Then we'll look at some Drupal views basics. And finally, we'll consider some advanced problems where you're going to need custom queries or subqueries, expressions, joins, and other ways to teach views new tricks. I hope you leave this session feeling empowered to use views even when you're developing complex features, and that you're ready for site building workflows that are inclusive to folks of all technical levels. By all means, feel free to tell me about yourself in the chat, and I will try to address problems that maybe reflect your group. And I just see someone recently said they have a love-hate relationship with views. That's going to be part of my presentation today for sure. So my name is Jim Vomero, and I'm a senior engineer at 4 Kitchens. I have over 10 years experience in Drupal, and I use the framework for all my nerdy hobbies. So running calculations for my brewing of beer, to planning my retro arcade projects, to teaching kids to survive the zombie apocalypse at local summer camps that I run. If you have any questions after the presentation, feel free to reach out. I am always excited to talk shop, and I'd love to keep the conversation going. I'm a web chef at 4 Kitchens, and we build websites and apps for organizations that depend on large scale or unconventional content. So we work with associations and publishers, enterprise organizations, media and higher education, and we make big websites. Now, I'm sure a number of folks in this room have worn the badge of webmaster at some point in their career. And this job was often a catch-all for every aspect of design and development and DevOps and marketing, communications. And so often it started as a department of one for your entire company's digital presence. And today, even if you still have too many responsibilities and are wearing too many hats, organizations have shifted around responsibilities as websites are no longer a novelty, but you still might find yourself fairly busy. More and more people are coming into this space to help out with the company's digital platforms. And all this rapid change can feel unsettling for those of us who have to support these underlying technologies. You know, life might have felt easier, or at least more stable, when only one person was able to make changes to the website. So let's jump in the Wayback Machine. Go back to the mid-90s when static sites were all the rage then too, but really because it was the only option. So HTML files were manually created in your editor of choice, maybe Notepad or VI, and then deployed. Super manual processes, thanks to the webmaster. As websites became more important though, this webmaster became a bottleneck. And your tech guru was copying and pasting content for emails. Or I remember opening up Microsoft Publisher files where an image was in there embedded, and I would have to find a way to paste it out, slowing down our content creation process. Things would evolve though, and we would have contributors become more tech savvy. So maybe learning through tools like Microsoft Front Page or Netscape Composer was mine. You'd be able to learn how to edit HTML. And folks would start to ask for FTP access to the server, which scared a lot of us, as our platforms really weren't ready for that kind of collaboration. So as the web was moving from this static brochure place into something really interactive and dynamic, we desired this fresh and collaborative environment where content can grow. And this idea of content management became to the forefront, and websites needed to be updated now daily with people wanting to add and edit content. And CMSs just took off and really dominated the web. So not just Drupal, but WordPress, Joomla, Red Dot, Plone, Nuke. There's so many others I still have nightmares of. These tools gave us libraries to help us make better websites faster. It didn't solve all our problems though. It seemed that our content owners always just wanted a little bit more access. So they needed to update a menu or modify a template, organize multimedia, create dynamic lists, like today's session about views. And folks were really starting to expect a back-end interface to be able to make these changes. As developers, this started to scare us again. Someone in my position might have an instinct to lock down configuration. And if someone says, can I change something in the sidebar? I would say, oh, well, that's in a template. Why don't you add a Jira ticket? And we'll bring it up at our next change management board, at our quarterly stakeholders meeting, wherever have you. Well, it's safe to say that CMSs are still evolving. And we need to find ways to balance access to the content management tools with acceptable website governance. This next section is going to get a little graphic because we are in the middle of a codeless movement. And you can follow the whole genesis on #NoCode on Twitter. It's this convergence of mature web apps and the APIs becoming very available that's bringing out a whole new suite of tools. And there's already a lot of buzz over things like Zapier and IFT for integration, or database replacements with Airtable, Smartsheets, Notion, and a ton of no-code app building tools like Webflow and Bubble. And I hope you can embrace these tools. They don't eliminate the need for a developer, but they probably shift our responsibilities to other parts of the stack. And we have to adapt because software is pushing the envelope, making it easy and even fun to build websites. So page builders are super common now. And I routinely look at our competitors or other folks in the industry, MailChimp, Squarespace, Wix, just to see how their no-code platforms are evolving. In Drupal, we're on a similar path. So for years, we had the panels module, which was great, but it could also be overwhelming. We're now at a point where field API and configuration are robust. And we see the layout builder becoming part of folks' daily workflows. So as developers, our content owners don't need us to click a button for them. Given the right workflow, many of these folks should be able to update fields, displays, menus, configurations on their own. And we don't want to be a bottleneck. We want to empower them to change their content. So for today's presentation, I've created a demo site for experimenting with views. Now, as a millennial, nostalgia is a bit of a drug. And so it's going to center around 90s movies that I saw while growing up. And all the examples are from real client work we did last year for a multimedia company that was hosting streaming TV shows. Our demo has 3 content types. Movies are the core content. Cast is a role in a film. So an actor might have 0 or more parts. And the actor is the role in that cast, or the member of that cast. So an actor can play 1 or more roles in a movie. So the relationships are movies, have cast members, have people. There's also 2 taxonomy terms. Category or genre is our top level term. And that is evergreen topics like action or comedy. And keyword are for more temporary campaigns. So like movies based on a book might be the tag in Drupal. All of the data comes from the Movie Database API, and all my code is shared on GitHub for you to explore later. I'll have that slide or the link at the end of the slide deck. So views. All right, onto the subject at hand. It's played an important role in the story of Drupal, and it allows site builders to fetch content from a Drupal database and represent that content as a collection of renderable elements. So there's a lot of display mechanisms, and you can do all this without writing a single line of code. Personally, I learned Drupal views before I understood how databases worked. In my early years with Drupal, I learned the concept of selecting and joining tables, traversing normalized versus denormalized content, the practical limits of filters, groups, aggregation, and all these database principles without knowing them by name. To me, I was just interacting with my content types. So a lot of site builders, I think, are in a similar space, very familiar with Drupal's information architecture, but lacking the formal computer science knowledge. And I think views is just a wonderful place where site builders can take charge and create complex and dynamic displays. And while there is a bit of a learning curve, there is no shortage of training material on the subject of views, and it's very low for the barriers of entry to get started. The benefits of using views are just like the benefits of using open source. And from what I could tell, this crowd has used views before, so I'll be pretty quick on this slide. They're feature rich. There's a lot of things out of the box that you don't have to recreate because views is going to do it for you. They're extendable. They work with a number of modules, and a site I create right now in views, I feel like is going to be supported years to come in future versions of Drupal. So we're limiting technical debt, and they're very consistent how they store configuration. Oh, I should also mention that a number of my slides are going to have a collection of movie on the right-hand side. And so to go in the spirit of my theme, they all have a thematic grouping. So this is totally realistic hacker movies. And I don't know, see if you can guess the other collections. All right. So I'm touting views like it's the best thing since sliced arrays. But most of my career, I tended to avoid them with a passion. And I think the reason for me is something shared among a lot of developers. I like to reinvent the wheel, mostly because I want to make sure I have the best and leanest tool for the job. So it involves building something from the ground up. I can stay more organized in custom code. You know, there's very little room for annotations and views, and it doesn't take much before the view is so complicated that someone can't figure out what's going on. There might be multiple arguments and relationships, and you're just lost in a world of overrides. Also, we just hit a limit of what views is capable of doing out of the box. Clients will always have special requests, and they don't need to know, and they shouldn't know, how the content model works under the hood. Working in views, like any framework, can feel restrictive in this way. So if you share my feelings, please keep an open mind. For most sites, I have overcome these issues of views by extending them through custom plugins. So we're going to look at our 90s movies website for some examples. Oh, in this collection of movies on the right-hand side, that is called Kool-Aid Man, and that's movies where a character breaks the fourth wall. All right, some examples. And if you're familiar with queries, you can see my sort of short annotation of what it might look like. And if you're familiar with views, you could probably get a concept of what this are. So just to pick a few of them, action and adventure movies, that is a collection of movies where the genre is action or the genre is adventure. So yep, it's in one of those two. Family comedies, that is going to be where the movie is a comedy and the movie is a family, because we don't want R-rated comedies to creep into that collection of movies. Or jumping down to something more complicated, box office bombs. So that is, in this case, we're calculating that as looking where movies where the profit's greater than zero, or I'm sorry, the profit is less than zero, and profit is calculated as a revenue minus budget, and we're going to sort by profit ascending. So we're going to look at the worst ones first. These are fairly straightforward. We're going to look at some examples of how I created these, and then we're going to create our own. Oh, in this collection of movies on the right, that is called I'm Too Old for This Shit. And that's movies where someone dies in or near a bathroom. All right, enough slides. Let's look at some code. I'll get you oriented to the site first. So this is my demo site for the day. And it includes a lot of the bands we just talked about. So action and adventure films. Here is a simple Drupal view. I'm using a jQuery plugin because I am not a front-end developer by any means, to just take a teaser view and put it in this nice animated slider. But this is just the teaser of the node. And if I look at this view in particular, we see, and let me zoom in. We see that the action and adventure is content of type movie, where the genre is action, or, oh, and this, I must have had the wrong one loaded. So action, and it's not including family movies. So we're getting rid of the kindergarten cop from this list of action movies. So that's just an example of a simple view. If you're new to views, there are some great presentations, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time orienting you to it. We're going to mostly look at fields, filters, and sorts for this. Let me close this one and show you what the nodes look like on this site. So here's a movie, Forrest Gump. All this data comes from the database API, and it's all text fields. So IMDb ID, a synopsis. One of the ones that's most important here is poster path. We're going to use this in our first example. So the image asset doesn't live on my site. It's going to come from a remote server, and I have to prefix this with a path name. So being able to render an image is going to be important, but here are the other things tagged to it: taxonomy terms, actors, things of that nature. Budget. We'll use these fields as we go. So let's start with our demo view. And our demo view, I've created a blank view here. It is rendering as a table. So maybe this is an administrative interface. And I did include a header across the top that's just going to say how many things are displaying. So as we update the view, we get some feedback. I'm only showing 10 at the moment. And it is movies that are published. Let me remove this. We'll recreate some of these fields as we go. If you're getting into queries, this is how I learned them as I was learning my database jargon, is changing things in views and seeing how this updated. So just like above, we are selecting some node field data. This is our base table for anything that's on that node. And we're going to look at the node data where the node status is 1, so it's published, and the node type is a movie. So nodes that are published, or movies that are published. And we scroll down, we see we have 436 of them, of my wonderful 90s movies. All right, let's do some fun. So let's say we want to add a field. And I mentioned that there was that poster path, and that is this field right here. It is a text field on the node. And if I click, and I'm just going to accept the default settings, I've added a new field. One thing to note, and I'm going to go back and forth on this, and it might not be obvious why right away. I added a new field, and it did not change the query. So keep that in mind when we start doing more advanced examples. I'll show you why. But here it is. There is our movie title and our poster. And that's not the most useful thing to me. I mean, I want to actually see what the poster looks like. Well, just using views out of the box, let's have some fun with it. So one of the features of views is you can rewrite the field with tokens and other values. So let's override the output of this. And in the magic of the internet, I already have the code ready here so I don't mess up my live demo. So I want a link, and it's not going anywhere at the moment, but it's going to show an image. The title field above it is going to be the alt text, and we are dropping in, and I just know from the movie database API that this is what I prefix to show the poster path here. Now if I click save, we should see now that each one of those text fields is rendering as that rewritten HTML. It's a field. This works, and you've probably done things like this in your views, but it's already making me feel a little dirty because I'm creating HTML in configuration, and I'm doing things in the theme layer that, I don't know, they're stored in a view. It's not very accessible. If I want to do it somewhere else, I now have to remember to update all the views where this thing exists. I could certainly trick out some more things. Let me open this field up again. And let's say, for example, the movie didn't have a poster. There is another section down here where you can do no results behavior. So maybe I have my default poster in here and I put that copy here. I'm going to hit the limits fairly quick though. In fact, if I were to just change the order of the fields, things could start to break. If the title field is not in the view before the image field, this value is not available, it gets complicated quick. And if you want to add any dynamic logic, for example, maybe my site is internationally changing the box art based on where you are. So the movie API allows me to request box art for Spanish language if I use a different endpoint. I am now at a disadvantage because I don't know an easy way to add PHP or other dynamic code in here without adding some more modules on and putting maybe business logic code inside configuration where it really doesn't belong. So I'm going to remove this field. It can't hurt us anymore. We're going to create our own. And let's create our first views plugin. As I said, all this is on GitHub. Go nuts and feel free to ask questions. I'll share the link at the end, or you can just check out my slide deck. It's already online. I have a module in here called Movies Views, and it's a blank module. If you've never created a module, it's going to be a lot of boilerplate. So if you're new to module development, this is going to be a session where you're going to copy and paste a lot. And if you're used to module development, but you've never done object-oriented code, once again, there's a lot of boilerplate, but it's just copy and paste. It's the same no matter what we do. So let's look at some examples. And the first thing that you'll have when creating a views plugin is an alter hook. And this is going to let Drupal know that you have a new views plugin available. And so the hook is hook views data alter. And so I have my module with the hook data alter, and you'll see it becomes very similar. So my first field plugin, it has the base table. So this is going to be just for node field data, and I'm calling it demo field plugin. I've used that as an ID here, so keep that in mind, demo field plugin. It has a title, demo field plugin, just the uppercase letters, and some help text, the field for this live demo. I have a number of other plugins in here as examples, and we'll look at some of these, but it's the same thing over and over again. So yay, you've learned the first step. Let us open, and that was called demo field plugin. Once again, if you're new to Drupal module development, especially Drupal 8, 9, we are using a convention to put our custom code in certain folders to stay organized. So source plugin views with that exact, capital case P, lowercase for the others. This is where all our plugins are going to go. And the first one we're going to look at is a field plugin. So source plugin views field. These are where all of my field plugins will be discovered and available to Drupal. And this one called demo field plugin, if I scroll up, we'll see that it has this at field annotation and demo field plugin. So this is the same name that it was called in the alter field. Once again, if you're new, I apologize, but if you copy and paste this, you are in business. The important part is we have the ID here and that we have this available. So every field plugin is going to have two parts. First part, the query. This is where we can override everything that's currently going on in the views query. So when our field gets to modify this view, it could change, alter, add logic to this existing query. The second part is the render. This is when we go to actually display the field, what does it look like? And so in that case, it's going to be the thing that appears right here on the right. Let's add it. Called demo field plugin. There was our title with the uppercase, our description. and I'm just going to allow the default settings for the moment. We'll scroll down and we should see our query method was empty, so nothing changed in the query, but our render method had something in, example field plugin for each one of those. Looking back at the code, we hadn't changed the query, but we are changing the render. And what we're returning in the render is something renderable. So a renderable object, in this case, just a string. Not super useful because I don't know what to do with this information. It's just text. But sky's the limit what you put in here. In fact, I could end the session right now and you're ready to take on Vue's plugins. You just need these two methods. But let's do something fun while we're here, shall we? One thing to note, we have this values being passed in. And I just happen to know that inside that value is the current entity for that row. So we're making a view with node data. Each row is a node. I have access to that full node at the moment that I'm in this render method. And there's times where it's advantageous to open that node up at this point. In fact, it's one of the reasons that as I add node fields here, we don't see the query update. It's because the node's already fully loaded, so we have access to that content. And unless there's a reason to do more processing at the query level, let's just access the node directly. So there's my entity. I grab the entity. In this case, it's a node. And I could do some checks. So for the sake of good commenting, I left out the name of the field. So the field I'm interested in is called poster path. Perfect. So I'm looking for this field poster path. And just for good housekeeping, let's make sure that the node we're looking at has the field poster path and that it is populated. It's not empty. If it is, return nothing. We're not gonna render it in this view. But let's assume that we have that data. Keep going. The path, since this is a node, if you're used to using the field API, we take the entity and we say, get this field, and we're gonna turn it to a string. So in that case, this is our path variable, and this should be pretty underwhelming at first, but I promise we're ramping up to something awesome. We are now returning, instead of that static text, we're returning the path, so the field value, and that's just field API. Has actually nothing to do with my presentation other than I'm trying to make an interesting example. I hit update preview, query hasn't changed, but the data has. So now we're back to where we started before with having the field display. Let's try to get to the point where we are rendering it somewhere interesting. Now, what I had said before was it just has to be a render array that we're returning. So in this case, I could return the entire, I could use the image template out of the box. And so the image template has some variables. And if you're used to Drupal theming, this shouldn't be a shocker to you, but I have access to the entity. So let's take the alt text will be the node title, and the URI for this image will be this path. So the same thing we built in Views, we've now recreated here. Hit update, preview, and we should see, wow, awesome, cool. All right, let's have some more fun with it. Everything I just did is pretty underwhelming and would beg the question, why would you go through all this work other than maybe like keeping things in PHP? It's because we now have a single place to do other types of logic. So for me, one of the first things I may want to do to empower a site owner is give them some options of what they're rendering. You know, the request came in from the client, I need to show the box art, but they might need it in multiple sizes. So if you're used to object-oriented programming, this should be fairly straightforward, but I am going to do some magic and copy and paste some things in. This plugin extends plugin base, which has some methods. And so two of them that you can use in all of your field plugins, one is called define options and the other is build options form. What you put in here is going to alter the options when you're managing your new custom field. And so this is using the Forms API. I've added a new option called image size. And it says it specifies an image size. And there's two options. It's a select list. One's called thumbnail, which is using width 92. One's called box, which is width 500. This is just Form API stuff. We're passing it to the form by reference. And we're setting a default value with this define options piece. Oh, also I have a new interface. So once again, sorry there's a lot of boilerplate, but you get used to it pretty quick if you're working in this space regularly for anyone who's a new developer. And there we go. We should now have this image size should now appear. And I don't know if I have to restart things to make that work. So let me refresh. And when I look at our field now, there should be a new form element. It has some help text for our editors and our site owners, along with the option, do I want it as a thumbnail or a box? Of course, I haven't actually done anything with that logic. That was just in the form. So come down to the render method. This is where we decided what would display, all the way down to where we're returning. And the trick here is I need to get the size that was selected in that option above, and there is a method for that. So the size equals this options, and then the name of the form element that we defined above. It was called image size. And I can now use this size variable instead of hard coding it here. Click save. And I will now change the image size to box art and hit apply. And I think now we've officially taken this to somewhere that's not easy to do in other ways. You know, you could create field formatters and trick out nodes in different ways, but we now have a spot where we can add interactive or dynamic business logic to our field, but the person managing the views doesn't need to know how the magic works under the hood. So this is where we can do our translations or sample images or any of the other things that may pop up as a business requirement, in this case for the box art. We can have in this field as business logic that you don't have to write any code to make appear. I know I'm running. I have to pick which examples I want to do cautiously because we only have so much time and I want to make sure there's plenty of time for questions. So let me just look at another example of a field plugin. So that was the demo. And I have a bunch here worth checking out. Profit is an interesting one. So, oh, I should mention on the field, the demo one we just did, we never actually modified the query. I didn't see, there it is. Here's our empty method. I didn't see a reason to. I already had the data I needed available to me, but I did leave it blank, and that's because it's required by the class we're extending. So this is enforced through an interface. So you will need to leave this empty if you're not going to change the query. All right, so let's look at our profit. Here's one where I do want to change the query. And one thing to note is this object has access to the query. So this query variable is a representation of everything that's currently happening in here. And so this is where we can start to modify that query. And for folks who are unfamiliar with the database API, I guess the most important thing to note is I have access to the query and I can change things. So let me skip all this for a second and say that this is the only line that matters, add field. So I'm adding a new field to this query called profit, or I could filter, or I could sort. In this case, I'm adding a field. For folks who are a little more comfortable with this, I'll quick walk you through the code. I just define this as a base field, so know that this is node data, just kind of abstracting that a little. And I'm using a join manager. This is a little underwhelming also because Drupal can do this out of the box by using its relationships. That's what a join is. I'll quick skip over here. I could join on a bunch of fields and get access to data, but I wanted to show an example in my code so folks had something to look at. And so I'm adding two new values, one for, let me scroll down, one for revenue and one for budget. So I'm looking at the revenue field, which is a field on the node for the movie, and the budget field, which is a field on the node for movie. And I'm adding those fields to this view. I'm also saying, make sure they're not empty. If so, don't consider this movie because this is from a publicly editable website. Sometimes they don't have that data available and I just don't want it to skew my results. So I've added two where clauses to hide movies where the budget or the revenue are empty. And then here is the last little piece of my database work is a calculation. I have this formula, which is to take the revenue minus the budget. And we add it to the view and we call it profit. Anything you want to do in a normal database API, you can do in this query method. And then to make it appear in your view, you have to do it in the render method. So I called it add field profit. I have access to it by going values profit. That will give me access to anything I did up above. And this is another example of why I would use a custom render or a custom field plugin is because I wanted to have some ownership of what that looked like. So the data coming in was just an int, and I want to convert that to something that looks like currency. So I changed the number format to have the right decimal. I'm prefixing it with the US currency symbol. And if I want, once again, I could maybe add some logic to adjust for inflation, or I could add some logic to change the currency based on user preference or whatever that might be. So put your PHP logic in here, keep it out of the views, and just to be curious, let's look at what the profits are. Custom profit calculation. I'm just going to accept the samples. and we'll see that we now have the query has changed significantly. So we are selecting a lot more. We're adding a revenue field, a value field, and a budget field, which is this calculation of revenue minus budget. So revenue minus budget as profit. And we are joining on those tables. So we have access to that data, and we're adding those filters I mentioned to make sure that things weren't empty. And here is where our values are rendered. Just to skip, well, no, I don't want to skip ahead too much. Let's look at an example of a filter. So that was a field plugin, which I use the most often. Somebody wants something in their view. I need to do some logic. I'll create a plugin, and now you can manage your views, and you don't need me to push buttons for you. Here's an example of a filter plugin. It's extremely similar. So this is a lot of boilerplate again. The name of it, the ID that you specify in your alter hook, is consistent here. So it's called example field filter plugin. And in this case, we only have a query method. So what do we want to do to this query to filter the data? And I do have an example here just for fun. Anytime you're doing a filter in using like a database API here, we're going to add a where clause. So in this where, we're going to say where the title contains an exclamation mark, and I've called this excited titles. That way you can see just the movie titles that have that exclamation mark. And let me remove the profit field because that was filtering ones that didn't have a budget or a revenue. And we'll add excited. Thought it was called excited. Maybe it's called something else. Oh, I'm adding a field. I shouldn't add a field. It's a filter. There it is, excited titles. And to look at the code one more time, there is just a query method where we're modifying the query to add a where clause. So let's apply the default example settings. And we should see that we're left with, I want to see nodes that are published, that are type movie, and where the title contains an exclamation mark. And we see some fantastic 90s movies right here. The where clause can also, the filters. Let me do this again. Anything you want to do in the query, you can do in this filter. And you can also add filters to the field themselves. But I try to keep my code organized so that my field logic is just relevant to the field and my filter logic is just relevant to my filter. But feel free to try to find a balance between when you're using the query method versus the render method. And to go back to like our very first example, demo field, I chose not to do anything with the query because it just wasn't performative. I already had access to the node. But in the example of using the budget calculation, I certainly had access to the budget field and the revenue field. But if I were to do that at render, it means for every row, I would look up values, make a calculation, and then process it. And that's pretty intense. It's way more efficient for me to do that in the query. So you're going to have to find your own balance if you're going to use the query method versus the render method when you're in a field. For the filter, you're always going to be using the query method. And then the last one I just want to show off is the sort. So it's not a custom sort to a view. It's very similar. It's all boilerplate. Copy and paste this. We're extending, in this case, sort plugin. The ID is going to be example sort plugin. It's the one that would appear in the alter hook, says, hey, we have a new plugin. And we just have a query method to alter as our minimal thing. There are other things, like to add form options. So query method here, I have access to the query, and I did load in an example. Oh, no, wait, that's just, here's my example. Let's sort by profitability. Through the magic, all the work is done. This is the similar code that you saw before where I'm joining. I did want to show an example of a different type of join. So if you're interested, I have that in here, just doing the join on the revenue, the budget to calculate profit. So in my query, just like before, I'm calculating profit as a field called, well, in this case, it's formula, but I've added an order by the formula. So this is the exact same thing we looked at before. Thank you, Tim. I see the note. But we're ordering, we're sorting by the profit of the movie. Let's take a peek what that looks like. I know I'm going through these examples fast, but they're on GitHub. I'll add the revenue field back in so we can prove that it is working, or the profit field. And we are going to sort by profit. And you can see I actually changed, instead of calling it ascending and descending, I changed the labels from hemorrhage money to the least bad first. And I did that through this method called sort options. So I was able to change what my sort options were, just something that's now makes sense to your content owners. And even for me, when I see a date sort ascending, descending, I was like, ooh, geez, what was that? How'd that work again? Let's check out the movies that hemorrhage money of worst. We see it's changed query dramatically. And oh, I'm still just sorting by, or still filtering by excited titles. Let's look at all of them. Let's get real nostalgic here. The worst movies of the 90s that I saw. The Postman. Man, do we underestimate that the theme of democracy in the post office could be something people would play into? Didn't do well. Sphere, there's some good movies on here. I don't know what they're talking about. So those are some examples of fields, filters, and sorts. I do have some other things in the Git repo worth checking out. Most important thing is you can separate those concerns and move all that custom code into a place that is very accessible. Back to the slides, so I can open up to some questions. First thing I want to say is allowing your users to create their own views can be scary, but with a little work, we can offer access. And so some strategies to keep in mind: creating new permissions and roles just for folks who can access views or a subset of views. It's not too hard in Drupal to say, create a custom permission where someone can't create views, but they can edit views that start with the prefix of content underscore. That might be a simple permissions handler to create. Definitely develop a training program so you have some peace of mind in who's going to be making changes. I suggest a feature request process where someone just can't make changes as they see fit, especially for enterprise organizations. There's probably some brand guidelines, accessibility, security, and folks using views have access to sensitive information. So you want to make sure they're trained and that their changes are getting approved, maybe through a code or a change review process. So keep that in mind. Process is going to be important, but just making things difficult by saying you have to come through me to create all your views is not a good security policy on its own. Oh, and the movies on the right, that's called Rocky's Horrible Picture Show. And that's movies of Sylvester Stallone that got 2 stars or less. How do we manage this? How do we actually do it? This is my last big thing, because it is scary to let folks change your views. And for a small team, how do you keep this code healthy for any size team? For a small team with great autonomy, I suggest, and this might scare you, working on production. I certainly have some family sites, some friend sites that are not updated often. And for me, my strategy is to take nightly backups of the database. And if they have to make changes on production, I check that code out and I export that configuration and I check it into my repo. So I save that configuration. It's not so scary, but maybe a more practical option for you is just to ignore the views configuration. So using something like config ignore allows you to ignore a static configuration, untrack it. And you could even do things like prefix all views that are prefix content underscore, we're going to ignore from config. And what this allows is views to be treated as content on production and move down the stack. I do this all the time with the web forms module, where content owners who are well-trained are allowed to create their own web forms, and it's not something I'm enforcing through configuration anymore. They needed that environment to be like a web form builder role in Drupal. I would do similar things with views. The most robust solution of how you can roll this out, and I do this, I did this recently with a university that needed a large tech stack. We had a copy of their production site, which was their content staging server, and is behind a private IP that mimicked production. And this was a place for them to create views freely as they needed. And when the view was ready, we had some scripts that used Drush and some command line tools that would pull the configuration out, check it into Git, run our integration tests, visual regression tests, things of that nature, get built on Circle CI. And we would say, okay, your views, they're acceptable. They worked. All the changes are now in version control. They were made on this separate server, pulled into our code, and now we can deploy into the real production. That strategy worked out pretty well if you have the DevOps support to pull it off. And my last category of movies here on the right, that's called Droid Rage, and that's movies where someone fights a robot. So I'd like to leave you with a simple sentiment. Empower your site owners, because the role of site builder just keeps expanding. And our technical literacy of all our users is increasing. So look for ways where developers can step aside, not be a bottleneck, and let the content delivery process really be owned by your content owners. So thank you so much. The GitHub repos on this slide, along with my contact. I'm in Jim on all the platforms, and I'd love to answer some questions.
Hey, Jim, thanks. That was great. So glad I picked moderating this one because I really wanted to attend it as well. So,
Awesome.
so we had a couple questions here in the Zoom chat. I didn't see any over on Slack. The first one was from Max Starkenberg, and he asked, how does one see the DB query and views previews? Some other participants answered that. Could you show us the
Yeah,
views settings screen?
let's look at it, because that is really worth knowing. And I can't stress enough how I didn't go to school for computer science, but I became pretty good at database administration solely from starting by using views. So when you're looking at your list of views, there is a secondary tab for settings. So you're probably familiar with this interface. And there's quite a few things going on in here that are useful. But scrolling down, we have show the query. You can also look at performance statistics. So I talked about, do I do this in the render or do I do it in the query? You could kind of plug out some performance statistics to go, oh, wow, this one's 100 times slower, and get a sense of where your code should be moved. So definitely check this look out, or take a look at this. I also use the Kint module, or I guess Devel, to dump things to the screen. Since this preview is through Ajax, I have to use, I believe it's a DSM or DPM. DSM. DSM will debug onto your screen if you don't have something like Xdebug. Next up.
Okay, the next question was from Lyra. How does a view get attached to the custom view module to use its rules?
Oh, yeah.
Functionality.
So one thing that's important is we are organizing our code as, in my case, as abstract as possible. So I am finding each one of my new fields in the module in its own file. So I have a field called, this one's called actor shortlist, and it will show me the top 3 actors for any movie. And this one is called my list. And this is on this website I have where you can say, I want to watch this movie later, and you add a little heart. Each one of these is a field, but it doesn't mean anything to the site itself. I'm just defining the options of what you could do with this field. The view itself, you're gonna attach by editing your view. So when I create a new view and I add a field, I have access to an instance of that code. So I want to add my new, in this case, actor shortlist. I have now added an instance of that field to my view, and everything else is just working with Drupal out of the box. So when I, if you're using, say, the configuration management system, I export my configuration, it's going to be in a YAML file that says this view uses this field, and Drupal will know what module that field's from through its discovery mechanisms. Hope that helps. I hope I got the question right.
Yeah, so Lyra had a follow-up there. They said the custom fields are available to any view you create. So basically,
that's correct.
You're creating a views plugin and it's available to any view.
That's right.
Okay, thank you. Someone asked, would defining new permissions and roles for accessing specific views be made via a custom module?
Probably. I think right now, the out-of-the-box views permissions to me are too all or nothing. And as much as I want to trust and have great training, it's just too much. Folks could do some real damage. And what I would probably do is create a new permission. There is another type of plugin that allows you to find permissions in Drupal, and you can do things like, say, can the user do X, Y, and Z, and you've created a new role, and you can add that permission to it. So it's outside the scope of this presentation, but it's actually a fairly, I would say, small to intermediate programming path to create a new permission in Drupal and give it some custom values. I would even go as far as to say they can't edit all views. They can only edit views that have a certain naming convention. That way it helps me further control, the content views versus maybe some blocks that are critical to the site's performance, or some data feeds that I don't want anyone editing.
Great, okay. Let's see, another question. We're almost out of time here, but I'll try to get to these. Can you build a field plugin where it is limited to a view style and the field name is determined from one of the style options?
I don't really know. One thing that you're definitely limited by, or can be limited by, is the type of entity you're pulling from. So even though a user can have a name and a node can have a title, those are very different fields. And so you have to decide early on, am I doing this for nodes? Am I doing this for users, a custom entity, or all of them? I can do it globally, but that means you have to write your code a little more platform agnostic. But they're meant to be pretty flexible. So even at that level, it really is open to everybody. I think it would be a pretty advanced workflow to prevent folks from using it. In fact, the only time that I think I've really limited views was, I don't know how I did it. I guess it was because I was changing the base table again. So instead of just a node or a user, a Solar search was another example of one where I wanted to use views out of the box. I wanted people to be able to edit their views. And it was actually for this TV site we built last year. And I only wanted folks to be able to use this field on those. And so that happened by attaching it in here instead of node data. It was the Solar result. So I think the easiest thing is to organize it by your entity type, but to get more granular, I don't know a way to do that out of the box. It might be in there.
Okay. Let's see. Could you put up the demo site again? Someone asked if they could take a screenshot. I just assumed the home page, maybe.
Let me open this up. Oh, there's some gems in here.
I think because we're out of time and we need to let the other speaker get in here and get set up, I'm going to have to end it. But I've got everyone's questions, and I'm going to give them to Jim. And if he's willing to stick around on the Slack channel, #coding-and-dev, you can join there and hopefully ask us the questions there. But I'll give them to him. And thank you, Jim, and thanks everyone for attending. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I'll see you in that Slack channel, and enjoy the rest of the conference. I'm excited.